Hi, I'm Jamaris Rivera, and for 1 day a week, for 5 weeks, I was gaining experience in elementary schools. The first 3 times I was placed at Salisbury Elementary School in Gap, PA. I was assigned to a preschool classroom where the kids were either 4 or 5. The next 2 weeks, I visited Ferguson K-8 in York, PA. I was placed in a 4th grade classroom. Each visit was on a Wednesday from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Mrs. Rebecca Shoemaker was the teacher I was assigned to at Salisbury Elementary. I was able to observe their free play for the first 30 minutes of class. After that, they had a morning meeting, calendar, and weather time. After, the class had small group time. While 2 to 4 children would do an activity with the teacher, the rest of the kids had more free play time. In Ferguson K-8, I joined Mrs. Tamano's classroom. The subjects that took place while I was there were reading, math, lunch, recess, and their special, which was either Spanish or gym. In Mrs. Shoemaker's room, there were 18 students. Out of the 18 students, 3 kids had an IEP. Most of the preschoolers were boys. There were only 6 girls. Most of the children were white, only 1 was of color. Also, out of the kids who would tell me how old they were, most of them were already 5. Mrs. Tamano's classroom was different. There were 24 4th graders in her classroom, with 7 kids having an IEP. The gender demographic was even, and unlike Mrs. Shoemaker's classroom, only 1 child was white and the rest were either black or Hispanic. In Salisbury Elementary, I was never specifically told who had an IEP. The assistant teacher told me that I would be able to tell who the 3 children were right away. I only noticed 1 child, and they seemed to have a speech and language disorder. Their words were slurred and hard to understand compared to the rest of the kids in the room. Over in Ferguson, 2 children had ADHD. 3 had learning disabilities that were not specified, 1 was emotional social, and 1 had a hearing impairment. In each room, I looked for any specially designed instruction, materials, accommodations, or modifications for a special education learning environment. In Ferguson, an accommodation that was introduced to me were headphones for whisper readers. These headphones allow the kids with a reading learning disability to speak into one end and hear their voice out of the other. Hearing their voice through the headphones helped them hear their pronunciation and any errors that were spoken. The desks the 4th graders sat in were made for right-handed and left-handed students. It makes it easier for them to write and gives them more comfort. Each room had an example of designed instruction. There was a daily schedule on the board for the kids. I believe this class schedule worked better for the 4th graders since they were able to read what was coming next. I created a more child-friendly version of their classroom schedule. In the morning, the 2 students with ADHD took longer to settle in, which caused the others to take longer to settle in. I believe the teacher could have settled the class in better and lower the chaos in the room by greeting them once they were all in their seats and read the schedule to them. While I was at Ferguson, I was able to visit the special education room with 3 other classmates of mine since the classrooms we were in did not have many helpful tools for a special education learning environment. In this room, we were introduced to a couple of materials. Switches were one of the materials. The 2 white and blue switches in the back are used for pictures. These are used for students who are nonverbal. Placing a picture in the switches helps identify their needs. For example, a student is given 4 pictures of different lunches, and they point to one to choose their lunch. The blue, yellow, and white switch on the lower left side is called a rocker. It is used for nonverbal students as well. This helps them say yes or no. The 2 blue and yellow switches on the lower right are recorders. There is a switch and a red button on the back that needs to be pressed in order to start recording. This helps the student hear their voice when they are working on their speech. It is a form of repetition. I believe this could be included in a general ed classroom as well for students who have trouble with pronunciation. Here, one of my classmates uses the recorder to show how it works.
Good morning, Sped 312.
Good morning, Sped 312.
Another material was at the door. In the room, there is a child with autism who is a runner. The special education teacher placed an alarm at the door. When the child with autism leaves the room, the alarm will sound and she will know that she needs to call someone to go get him. Once again, in both schools, I looked for examples of behavioral, organizational, and motivational materials created for a special education learning environment. In Salisbury, there was a mattress set up with pillows. This is where the kids would go whenever they were feeling upset and needed to calm down by themselves. On one Wednesday while I was there, I realized why that area was created. It was created for the child who seemed to have a speech and language disorder, which I now learned on my own that they might have a behavioral disorder as well. I realized it when the assistant teacher placed him there when he started getting upset, and when another student told him that if he is mad, he needs to go to the bed. The idea of having it for the student was nice, but I think it gave the teachers and students more of an opportunity to single him out. Most of the time, he would behave the same as his other classmates and still get sent there. In Ferguson, Mrs. Tamagno involved every student in any behavioral, organizational, or motivational material created for a special education learning environment. No child was singled out, which was nice to see. Mrs. Tamagno would make every student hand in a homework check as an organizational material at the beginning of the day. This is what it sort of looked like. It needed to have the assignment, date, and signature of the parent written down. Mrs. Tamagno told me that it is difficult to get them to get their homework done. Without a homework check, none of the students would even do their homework. Brain breaks were used as a behavioral and motivational material. They would occur at 2:20 to 2:35, so I was unable to see what they did, but it certainly seemed like the fourth graders really enjoyed them. If students were misbehaving in the hall, she would tell them that she would take their brain break away. Just saying that would cause more than half of the class to start being respectful in the hallway. My first impression of Salisbury Elementary was that the kids were all very well behaved, and I was trying to scope out which kids had an IEP. Like I mentioned before, in Mrs. Shoemaker's classroom, the assistant teacher told us that the 3 who have an IEP are easy to spot out. Out of the 3, I was only able to identify 1 that had a speech and language disorder and maybe a behavioral disorder. My first impression of Ferguson Elementary was not the best. There were signs on the entrance doors that stated, "No weapons allowed in school." Also, when I walked in, the teacher already seemed stressed out without the students even being there. Once the kids walked in, I tried to figure out which kids may have an IEP. It was difficult because all of them struggled with staying on task, reading fast enough, and getting the correct answers on their math problems. I was also told that 1 to 2 fist fights break out in the classroom, so it seems to me that the students have trouble controlling their anger. She had to tell me in order for me to notice, like I mentioned before, that 2 kids suffered from ADHD, 3 had a learning disability, 1 was emotional social, and 1 had a hearing impairment. My beliefs about special education or inclusion have changed while I had the opportunity to be in these classrooms. I believe that schools and teachers do not do enough to give students accommodations, especially in Ferguson with 4th graders. I was expecting there to be more teachers involved with the students with learning disabilities. Instead, there were not. I believe it is up to the teachers to advocate for their students and also be there for them when they are having trouble learning or focusing. In the 4th grade classroom, I noticed that the kids with ADHD are ignored and not given as many reminders as the rest of the kids. The 2 students with ADHD were also placed in specific parts of the room. Both of them were away from the window, but one was in front and the other was placed in the back corner by himself. Also, the students did all of their work individually or as a class. Being in a 4th grade classroom and listening to a class lesson can be very boring for the students. And the students definitely showed that they were bored because within 10 minutes of the math lesson, all of their focus was gone. So I believe there needs to be more one-on-one or small group work in order to help the students stay focused and get to where they need to be academically. The teacher let it up to my partner and I to walk around and help them. More than half of the class needed help, so I think the teacher still should have walked around with us and helped. In both classrooms, the main setting was inclusive, which I thought was effective. In Salisbury, only 1 student was pulled out. I was unable to ask why he was getting pulled out, but when he was, it was at an appropriate time. The preschooler was taken out during small groups and always came back in time for his small group. In Ferguson, some students would be taken out during math time to read. I do not believe math time is an appropriate time to pull them out for reading, especially since more than half of the class is academically behind. I still love the idea of inclusion if the students are capable of it. Looking back to my years of being in public school, I never realized what my teachers did to make it capable for every student to learn properly until now. I think the world of special education struggles but is amazing. Even though I think the teachers should do more, I still see the little things they do in order to help their students become successful. It amazes me. In both schools, I saw how much each teacher loved each and every one of their students, with a disability or not, and how much they want them to be successful. In conclusion, as I achieve my goal of becoming a teacher, I want to constantly think of things I can do to accommodate to my students and help them learn better. I still wonder how far teachers go in order to help their students who need materials or accommodations to learn better. I never got to ask if they have to provide the accommodations or materials themselves or if the school district provides them. I wonder how much each teacher advocates for their students to get a proper education as well. No matter what grade I teach, I plan to greet my students and have a small morning meeting with them. I would try my best to do small groups and more one-on-one in order to help my students become successful. I would like to incorporate brain breaks into my teaching because they seem to be effective as well.